Hello. Okay, today we're going to talk about developing a research question. And this is going to be the first lesson. There's going to be several of them, about 4 of them. And today's going to seem fairly in-depth, although there's really only 1 or 2, 3 small takeaways that you need to come away with on this one. So don't feel too overwhelmed. We're going to get some really good solid examples that we're going to look at, but you don't have to go that in depth on your first try, okay? All right, so let's look at what a research question is. The definition, first of all, is a research question is clear, focused, concise, and arguable. Okay, so that's going to be a big one, okay? Arguable, meaning you can argue one way, maybe another person can argue a different way. But anyway, we're going to center our research around it, okay? It's where we're going to aim our research through, okay? This is going to guide what our research is. All right, not only that, it is really going to be the focus of our research. It's going to be where our research aims, okay? And it cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. That's it. Okay, so if we have a question that is very easily answered, that's not going to be the research question that we want, right? If it's a yes or no, that's not going to be a good question for us. And again, today we're going to look at some very in-depth research questions. That is not going to be the type of questions that we're going to develop right away, but those are going to be our aim as we go through. And we're going to get lots of practice with this. It's probably going to take us a good solid 2 weeks of a lot of practice in order to develop those in-depth research questions that we want. So that's not really what our focus is going to be today, to come away with all of those. But our big focus today is we don't want it to be an easy answerable question. We don't want it to be a yes or no question, okay? So here's kind of some key elements of a good research question. Number 1, it must be clear and it must be specific. It must be precise, not vague, okay? We don't want just what about this or that, do you think maybe this in World War II? That's extremely vague, right? We're going to get very, very precise with our research questions. Okay, that's going to be very, very big. You'll see that as we go through it, okay? We're going to mention a very specific type of population, a phenomenon, or a setting, okay? And we'll get some practice with that in class, but we do not want it to be vague at all. And this second part here, you're going to see, this is going to be a big one. We don't want it to be Googleable. That's not really a word, but to Google something is a word now. So if you can Google it and get the answer, that's not a good research question. We don't want it to be a yes or no question. We want it to be an open-ended question. Okay, so if you can answer it yes or no, or you can quickly just pull out your phone and say, hey, Google, and you can come up with an answer right away, that is not a good research question, okay? It must be arguable, meaning you could argue one way, maybe a friend could argue a different way. 2 people researching the same exact topic might come up with different answers. That is a good research question, okay? That's the type that we want, okay? And then finally, it must be researchable, and this, especially when we get into early America, can be a challenge because we might find a really good topic, but we might not be able to find really good primary sources that might not find something that we can actually answer our question with. We might find something, especially when we get way back with some of these like Salem witch trials or Jamestown or something like that. We might have some really good questions, but we may not be able to answer them just because we just don't have the resources to do so. So that may not be a good question just because we just simply don't have the resources in order to find the answers to those questions. Okay, so clear and precise. It can't be vague, right? Can't be Googleable, no yes or no, and we have to be able to actually find the answer to it. Okay, so those are the big 3 components. If you can come away with that today, then we're going to be good. All right, let's look here at some good ones and some bad ones. Okay, so let's just take some general topics. We've got the Revolutionary War. Okay, during the Revolutionary War, we've got lots of different areas that we can talk about here. Okay, so let's see. What were the causes of the Revolutionary War, right? I mean, that could kind of be a question you might answer. Well, that's not really a great one because you could kind of list some things off, right? You could Google that one really quick. Instead, what might be a better one is we could say, how did the economic policies of the British Empire contribute to the start of the American Revolution? Okay, well, this is a better question because you think about economic policies. Well, what were the economic policies at the start of the Revolutionary War? Well, you think, well, an economic policy, that would probably be things like the Stamp Act, right? When they put that in, and boy, did that tick off the Americans at the time. Well, I guess they were colonists at the time, right? That really made them mad. So that would be an economic policy that the British put in place that contributed to the start of the American Revolution, right? That might be one of them. There are several of them that went into place, but that would be a really good research question. It's very open-ended. It's arguable. What might be a bad research question is, did the American colonies dislike British policies? Well, okay, that's a yes or no question. That's not a really good one. It can be answered simply yes or no. It doesn't really explore specific policies or their impacts. Okay, so it's not really a strong question. You can start to see how the first question is a better question. And again, we're not looking for you to develop these rich questions like we're seeing here, these examples right away, but you will. In a couple of weeks, you're going to have those really good, rich questions. Let's look at another topic, the Great Depression. Now, there's a lot we can study with the Great Depression. There's so many different policies that came about through the Great Depression, the causes of them, how we got out of the Great Depression. But let's study one specific good research question first. Okay, what were the key economic and political factors that led to the Great Depression, and how did they vary across different regions of the United States? Okay, well, this is good. So we've got key economic and political factors that led to the Great Depression. And how do they vary across different regions of the United States? Okay, so we're looking at several different things here, and these are very arguable because we've got economic, political factors. Depending on the research, you could argue one way, you could argue a different way. This is really good. This is something we're not going to be able to just Google it really quick and get an answer. And we're talking about different regions. We could talk about the West, Midwest. We could talk about the East. There are a lot of different ways we could go about this one. And our research will help drive us in one direction on this. And this would be really, you talk about a rich research question. This is a really good one. Now, a bad research question with this would be, was the Great Depression a sad time for people in the U.S.? Now, this would be a research question we would expect from like an elementary age student, right? Was it sad? Were people sad at the time? And that would be about what we expect from that level. But from you, we're expecting a lot more than this, right? We're progressing, and you can do a lot better than this. So this, we're progressing. We're going to be better than this. So we want to think a little bit deeper on this, right? This question here, it's simplified, right? It's very vague, it's subjective, and it lacks a lot of focus. So now what I want to do on the next one here is I want to give you the bad question first. I want you to see if you can identify what is wrong with this question and maybe how we can improve it, okay? All right, so the topic on this one is the civil rights movement. So we're talking about the mid-1960s. Okay, the civil rights movement, and I'm going to give you the question. I want you to identify what is wrong with this question. Okay, so this is the bad research question. Was the civil rights movement covered by the media? Okay, think about that for a second. See if you can identify why this is a bad research question. See if you can identify it. And maybe what can be done to improve this research question. There are a lot of different things that I don't like about this one. What can be done to improve it. Okay, it's bad. It's very simplistic. It's a yes or no question, right? I don't like this. You can Google it and find the answer really quickly. I don't like any of those aspects of it. Well, what can we do even using this media? We can still use media within our question to create a really good, rich research question, right? What role did the media play in influencing public opinion and government policy during the civil rights movement? This is much better. This is much better because you can look at your primary sources that you've got. You can look at your secondary sources as well, but specifically your primary sources, and start seeing the role that media is playing in the civil rights movement. And you go, okay, I can see that the media is having a big influence here. You can see that it's influencing what the public is seeing, what they're reading. And not only that, you can see that it's starting to sway not only public opinion, but you can see that it's starting to sway the government policies. And so you can develop your research question right around that. After you've analyzed those documents, those sources, those primary sources, those secondary sources, you're like, hey, I'm starting to see something here. So then you can form your research question around that and say, this is what I'd really like to study. This is the question that I want to answer through my research. So that would be a better question to answer. Okay, now let's look at the Louisiana Purchase. I'm going to show you a bad research question, and then you can hopefully identify what's wrong with this question, and then maybe how we can make it better here. Okay, did the U.S. buy land from France in the early 1800s? Now, what's wrong with this question as you read this one? And maybe what can we do to make this question better? Yeah, this one is a yes or no question, right? Is yes, did the U.S. buy land from France? You just Google it. It's, yeah, indeed we did, right? The Louisiana Purchase. We bought land from them, from Napoleon in the early 1800s, just about doubled our land mass for the United States. Okay, so a better one than this, and there's lots of different ways you could go with this one. You could study the politics behind it. You could study the Native American relations with Americans at the time, the Homestead Act afterward, what that did through the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could study this. So, but anyway, it's too straightforward. Factual is just a yes or no. There's no analysis needed. But a good research question was, how did the Louisiana Purchase impact the geopolitical landscape of North America and the future foreign policy of the United States? You talk about maybe how did this impact the Manifest Destiny movement? That was, talk about a rich research question. That would be amazing to study. That would be really a lot of fun. So we're starting to kind of see this just time and time again here. And really, here's the big one. And what I would do if I were you on this one is I would pause the recording here, and I'd take this and I'd put this in our notes, because these are the questions you want to be asking. We refer to this as our research questions, starting research questions with the W, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? They all have a W in them. In fact, they all start with the W except for how, and it ends with the W. That's why we put it at the end, right? And if you can somehow incorporate one of these into your question, you'll usually have a lot better research question. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Figure out a way to incorporate those, and that usually helps you to develop a better research question, okay? So pause the video now, write that down on your notes, and then come back and push play. We don't have much left. I want to give you one more example, or one more set of examples on one specific event in U.S. history. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to put that in your notes. There's one more event in U.S. history I want to go over, and I'm just going to give you a couple examples on this one event. It is, I just moved that kind of up. Same thing, I just moved it up. Women's suffrage. Okay, so there were a lot of events that led up to the women's suffrage movement, or occurred during the women's suffrage movement, maybe is a better way to say it, which led to the 19th Amendment, and then, of course, the women's suffrage continued after the 19th Amendment in the women's role in politics and all that. But so let's just talk about a couple of key events here. So the Seneca Falls, this was the middle of the 19th century, right? Middle of the 1800s. This was the first major women's rights convention. And at this convention, okay, so they had a group of individuals that got together and was really pushing for women's rights, right? Women's right to vote was a major issue that they were discussing and pushing for. And so we want to think, okay, what is a good research question that can come from this event? Okay, we could talk about who were the key players at this event, what were the major outcomes that came from this event, when was this event, where was this event, and how did it lead to major policy changes? Why did this event occur? How did this event influence different things? Okay, so you could start with any of those types of things and just try to come up with one. How did the Seneca Falls Convention influence the early women's suffrage movement and lay the groundwork for reform in voting rights in the United States? Right? You could try. What I always try to do is, okay, how many different good research questions can I come up with for each one of those? That's kind of a good practice that you can do with these. I really if I can kind of get better at those, that's a good way to kind of get a little bit of practice. Okay, so that's one of the women's suffrage events. Another one is the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade. So if you can kind of think of, we've got the Civil Rights March. This is a similar one where it's drawing attention to the women's suffrage movement. And this parade, okay, so we could say who participated in the women's suffrage parade and what events led up to the women's suffrage parade, and what was some of the key takeaways from the women's suffrage parade. When did this women's suffrage parade, and when did the results, maybe when did the results actually take place after the women's suffrage parade? When did the laws actually take place, or when did they change? That's kind of a really easily Googleable answer, so I don't really like that one. Where did it take place? It's really easily Googleable. I don't really care for that one in this case. Why? That's an important one here. Why did the women's suffrage parade take place? That would be a decent one. How? How did it get to this place? Who were the key organizers and participants in the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade, and how did this event help shape public perception of the in favor of the movement? Okay, so we got a little grammatical error there, as you can see. How does this event help shape public perception of the event in favor of the movement? It's probably what it should say, of the event in favor of the movement. So I've got a little error there. I apologize for that, but that would be a decent research question right there. That would be a nice one. 1920, 19th Amendment was ratified. So this is the one that officially gave women the right to vote. Okay, so who were the major players behind the 19th Amendment that helped ratify it? What were the challenges that they had to overcome? When did the women not only receive the right to vote, but when did they? When is a tough one, because that one's an easy one to answer. So you have to. When did they start to feel in American society that they needed the right to vote instead of just having men have the right to vote? That might be one you could do there, right? So let's look at some of these here. What were the challenges overcome by suffragettes in obtaining the 19th Amendment in 1920? And how did this amendment reshape the role of women in American democracy? You start to see how these are not just answerable yes or no, and these are not Googleable. But these are ones that, man, as you start gaining these primary sources, you start reading them, you're like, okay, I've got questions here. And I'm starting to kind of, my research is leading me in one direction. And I want to kind of see, it looks like I'm starting to get something that's really interesting here that I want to answer through my research. And it'll lead you in one direction, which really starts getting interesting. And so there's one more that I want to just look at here, which is really interesting. Wyoming. Wyoming was the first territory to grant women the right to vote in the United States. So that's interesting. So this becomes very interesting. Okay, who were the people behind this? That might be very interesting. Okay, what were the events that led up to women getting the right to vote in Wyoming? Okay, where did the women come from before they went to Wyoming, and why did they get the right to vote in Wyoming? How was this possible in Wyoming when it wasn't possible anywhere else in the United States at the time? Some of those, that might be interesting. What social factors led Wyoming to become the first U.S. territory to grant women the right to vote? And how did this decision influence the suffrage movement and Wyoming statehood? Oh, that would be interesting. So anyway, you start to just kind of see these. So the biggest thing that we want to understand at the end of this is, so there are three big takeaways that I want you to be aware of here. Okay, a research question needs to be clear and specific. Okay, where it's not really vague. What was the women's suffrage movement? No, that's very vague, not very specific, easily Googleable, right? We don't want that. Okay, so it should be precise. It should not be vague. No, yes or no, and it should be open-ended. And finally, it needs to be researchable. So in other words, and this is the big one you'll just find through your research, you can't really come up with a research question until after you've gathered enough research to know that you've got sources enough to be able to answer it. So you don't come up with a research question right away. You need to gather enough sources first to know that you can start to answer this one before you can actually come up with your research question. So we're a little bit early on to develop a research question for our major projects. However, we're just getting the process down right now. Like I say, it's going to take us a couple weeks to actually start forming some really good quality ones, but we're going to start actually forming these now and getting this practice now. So if you need to, go back and rewatch this video as many times as you'd like, but this is our first step into developing a research question.